The military transport crawled through the narrow valley of Varith Prime, its engines rumbling against the silence of the alien landscape. Inside, Sergeant Jake Morrison stood braced with his rifle in hand, eyes scanning every shadow. This was meant to be a peaceful diplomatic mission, but Jake had long ago learned that peace was often just the quiet before an explosion. Across from him sat Queen Azara of the Crithian Empire, ruler of a race unlike anything human eyes had ever known. The Crithians were tall and slender, their skin crystalline like colored glass. When light struck them, it scattered into small rainbows that shimmered across their translucent forms. The queen sat with perfect posture, regal and unmoving, her expression unreadable. Jake hadn't even been part of this mission until yesterday. He was a last-minute replacement after another guard fell ill. He didn't speak the Crithian language, didn't know their traditions, and never imagined he'd stand this close to their monarch. The humans and Crithians had been locked in a brutal war for 3 years, countless lives lost on both sides. This meeting, everyone hoped, would finally bring it to an end. 6 Crithian royal guards surrounded their queen, towering warriors, nearly 7 feet tall, clad in armor that looked like it had grown from their own bodies. Jake had heard stories about them, the most elite fighters in the Crithian Empire, warriors said to die before letting harm touch their queen. The valley outside was eerily silent. Too silent. Jake's instincts screamed at him. He glanced out the window. Sheer cliffs loomed on both sides. If there was ever a perfect place for an ambush, this was it. Then the world exploded. The lead vehicle erupted into fire. The shock wave slammed through the convoy, deafening Jake and throwing him off balance. Their transport veered sharply and smashed into the valley wall. Smoke filled the cabin. Through the small windows, Jake saw armed figures sprinting along the cliff tops. Raiders, scavengers who attacked anyone for a profit. "Everyone take defensive positions," someone shouted over the comms. The back door blew open in a burst of fire and shrapnel. Jake grabbed his rifle and turned toward the queen, but her guards had already formed a shimmering wall around her. The human diplomat beside him screamed into a radio, calling for backup. The second blast came before the call ended. Their vehicle flipped violently, metal screeching as it tore apart. Jake was thrown into the air weightless for a terrifying instant, before crashing hard onto the rocky ground outside, his vision blurred. The transport burned nearby, flames licking the sky. His ears rang everything distant and muffled. But training kicked in, he forced himself to his feet. He needed to find survivors. Through the haze, Jake saw the Crithian guards hauling the queen from the wreck. Relief surged through him. She was alive. But then movement caught his eye. Raiders, dozens of them, were descending the cliffs. A missile streaked downward and exploded near the Crithians. The blast threw everyone off their feet. The queen tumbled onto the rocks, dazed but alive. The guards rose, looking around. And for the first time, Jake saw fear in their eyes. Then the unthinkable happened. The royal guards, the queen's sworn protectors, looked at each other, then at their wounded ruler, and ran. One by one, they turned and fled toward the far end of the valley, abandoning her to die. Jake stood frozen in disbelief. Queen Azara, struggling to rise, watched her own guardians vanish into the distance. The raiders were closing in fast. Jake didn't think. He just moved. He sprinted across the rocks toward the queen, gunfire erupting around him. Bolts of energy exploded in the dirt by his boots. He didn't slow down. He reached her just as the first raider appeared from behind a boulder. Jake stepped in front of her, raised his rifle, and shouted, "Stay down!" Not even sure if she understood. He fired. The first raider fell. More followed, too many. Jake knew he couldn't survive this fight, but that didn't matter. When he'd become a soldier, he'd sworn to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. It didn't matter that this someone was supposed to be his enemy. Queen Azara stared at him, stunned. Her own kind had abandoned her. Yet this human, a soldier from the species at war with hers, stood his ground to defend her. Something shifted in that moment, something far greater than either of them understood. The future of 2 civilizations was about to change forever. Raiders closed in from all sides. Jake checked his ammo, 40 rounds left. He knew the math. He wouldn't win. But he wasn't fighting for victory anymore. He was fighting to keep her alive for as long as he could. Maybe reinforcements would come. Maybe the other soldiers would reach them in time. It was a small chance, but it was all Jake had. He fired again and again, every shot precise, every bullet meant to matter. The raiders were learning now, no longer charging recklessly. They were hiding behind rocks, moving with caution after seeing how quickly the first wave had fallen. Behind him, Queen Azara tried to stand. Her movements were unsteady, her breathing shallow. A deep cut along her side glowed faintly, her blood giving off a soft light in the smoke-filled air. She was injured but alive, and to Jake that was enough. "Can you move?" he called, squeezing off another shot at a raider trying to flank them. To his surprise, the Queen answered in English. "Yes," she said, her voice sharp but trembling. "I can move." Jake blinked in disbelief, but there was no time to wonder how she knew his language. "There's a cluster of rocks at 3 o'clock, he shouted. "If we can reach them, we'll have better cover." The Queen looked at him with those shimmering rainbow eyes, alien, deep and full of something that might have been sorrow, and nodded once. Jake unleashed a quick burst of gunfire to keep the raiders pinned down, then reached for her arm. "Go!" he yelled. They sprinted together across open ground. Blinding bolts of plasma sliced through the air around them. One struck Jake's shoulder, searing through his uniform. Pain flared hot and sharp, but he didn't stop. He kept running until they both dove behind the rocks, just as another volley of shots tore through the space they'd been standing in seconds ago. Jake pressed his back to the stone, gasping for air. He checked his rifle, 32 rounds left. 2 extra magazines in his vest. That was it. A short fight, he thought grimly, but at least he wouldn't die for nothing. Queen Azara sat beside him, breathing hard. Up close, Jake could see her more clearly now. Her skin wasn't just crystalline. It refracted light itself, scattering tiny rainbows across her face and arms. She was beautiful and strange and bleeding. "You're hurt," Jake said, pulling out his field kit. The Queen glanced down at the glowing wound as if noticing it for the first time. "It will not kill me," she said quietly. "I will live long enough to die the right way." Jake tore open a pressure bandage. "Nobody's dying today," he muttered. "Not if I can help it." He pressed the bandage firmly against the wound. The Queen hissed in pain but didn't pull away. Her blood was thick, almost like liquid crystal, glowing faintly even as it soaked into the fabric. Jake wrapped the bandage tight and secured it with practiced speed, ignoring the heat of battle around them. Then she spoke again, her voice low but steady. "Why did you stay?" Jake paused, meeting her eyes. "You are human," she said, "and I am your enemy. Our peoples are at war. You should have run as the others did." Jake tied off the bandage and sat back, breathing hard. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Your guards might have forgotten what they swore to protect, but I haven't forgotten mine." "Your promise was not to me," she said softly. "No," Jake replied. "My promise was to protect anyone who can't protect themselves. That's what soldiers are supposed to do." He peeked over the edge of the rocks. The raiders were regrouping, moving slower now, preparing for another push. "Besides," he added, "if I can keep you alive, maybe this whole damn war can end. You're the Queen. You have the power to make peace real." Queen Azara's expression shifted, something unreadable passing over her face. "You have more faith in my power than my own people ever had," she murmured. Before Jake could respond, another volley of plasma fire crashed against their cover, scattering shards of stone in every direction. Jake ducked low and returned fire, each bullet placed with deadly precision. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jake dropped 3 raiders in quick succession, his rifle barking fire into the dust-choked air. But more of them kept coming. They were adapting now, splitting up, trying to flank from both sides. "We can't stay here," Jake said between breaths. "They'll surround us." "Then we are already dead," Queen Azara replied calmly. "There is nowhere to run." Jake glanced around the valley. She was right. The cliffs were sheer, impossible to climb. Every exit was covered by enemy fire. They were trapped unless he could change the odds. "Can you use a weapon?" he asked her. The Queen raised her hands, elegant, fragile, like sculpted glass. "I am a queen, not a warrior," she said softly. "I was trained to rule, to speak, to create, not to kill." "Then you learned today," Jake said, pulling his sidearm free. He handed her the pistol, pointed at the bad guys and squeezed the trigger. "The gun does the rest." She hesitated before taking it, holding it like something alien, heavy, dangerous, unfamiliar. "This is not how I imagined my reign would end," she murmured. Jake gave a grim half-smile. Yeah, well, life's full of surprises. He checked his rifle. 20 rounds left in the mag. Listen, I'm going to draw their fire. When they all turn toward me, you run to those boulders on the right. That's closer to where our reinforcements will come from. If help shows up, they'll reach you first. You will die, Queen Azara said. It wasn't a question. Probably, Jake admitted. But you won't, that's what matters. For a long moment, the Queen just stared at him, eyes glowing faintly in the smoke. Then she said quietly, I do not understand humans. Jake smiled, weary but genuine. Join the club. Most of us don't either. He adjusted his rifle, ready to move. On 3. 1, 2. Wait, her voice stopped him. She reached out, her cool, crystalline fingers brushing his arm. Thank you, Jake Morrison. I will remember what you did here. Jake nodded once. Try to remember it for a very long time. Then he burst from cover, firing as he ran. Every raider turned toward him, weapons flashing. Bolts of plasma exploded all around, burning the ground where he'd been seconds before. Behind him, he heard the Queen running, her light footsteps echoing across the rocks. Jake dove, rolled, fired again. He was a blur of movement and gunfire, forcing the raiders to focus on him, buying her every second he could. They came at him like a wave, 20, maybe more. Jake ducked behind a fallen boulder, swapped magazines. 15 rounds left, 15 bullets between him and death. He peeked out. The raiders were moving tactically now, using debris for cover. He could see a dozen, maybe double that unseen. But then far away through the haze, Jake spotted Queen Azara reaching the distant boulders. A flicker of relief passed through him. At least she had a chance. A shadow moved to his left. Jake spun and fired twice. The first shot missed, the second hit home. 13 rounds left. Then a new sound cut through the chaos, the sharp, powerful thud of human weapons. Jake's heart leapt. Reinforcements. Through the dust, he saw armored soldiers storming in from the far end of the valley, human Marines, firing heavy rifles into the raiders' flank. But they were still too far away. The raiders realized it too. 8 of them broke off, sprinting toward the Queen's position. Jake's blood ran cold. She was trapped between 2 advancing groups. He was too far to reach her. Queen Azara leaned from cover and fired the pistol Jake had given her. The shots went wide, missing every target, but Jake still felt a surge of pride. She was fighting. She was trying. And then, something happened that Jake Morrison would never forget. A dark figure dropped from the cliffs above, crashing down among the raiders like a meteor. The impact sent dust and sparks flying. It was one of her royal guards, the massive Krithian named Keelan. Jake recognized him instantly. He had seen this same warrior board the transport that morning, and later run away in fear. But Keelan wasn't running anymore. The Krithian roared, a deep, thunderous sound, and charged into the raiders. His armored fists struck like sledgehammers. Plasma fire bounced harmlessly off his crystalline armor. He moved with terrifying speed for someone his size, cutting through the attackers with brutal precision. Within seconds, the ground was littered with bodies. Jake used the chaos to sprint forward, firing as he went. Behind him, the human soldiers engaged the remaining raiders. The tide was turning at last. When Jake reached the Queen's position, Keelan was already lifting her to her feet. The warrior's face was unreadable, but his voice carried shame and resolve. My queen, he said, I failed you once. I will not fail again. Queen Azara stared at him, her expression a storm of betrayal. Grief and hope, she opened her mouth to speak, but another explosion shook the valley. This is touching, and all Jake shouted, scanning for more threats. But we need to move now. More raiders were regrouping in the distance, though the humans were pushing them back hard. Can you carry her? Jake asked. Keelan nodded, scooping up his queen with surprising gentleness as if she weighed nothing at all. Jake took point, rifle raised. Together, they ran toward the human lines. As they moved, more Krithian guards emerged. From hiding among the rocks, the same warriors who had fled before one by one, they stepped forward again, drawn by the sight of their queen still alive and by the courage of one human soldier who refused to run. The royal guards eventually returned, forming a tight circle around their wounded queen. Jake wanted to be angry at them for abandoning her earlier, but he was too exhausted, too relieved to care. They were here now, that was enough. The medical bay aboard the human ship. Valiant wasn't built for Krithian physiology, but the doctors did everything they could. Queen Azara sat on an examination table while Dr. Peter Grant scanned her wounds, his expression a mix of curiosity and unease. Jake stood near the door, rifle in hand, relaxed but ready. He had been assigned as her personal guard, an unusual decision. Housing an enemy queen on a human battleship was strange enough, but assigning a regular sergeant as her protector was even stranger. Yet Queen Azara had insisted. She refused treatment, refused food, and refused to speak until Jake was brought to her. The admirals had no choice but to obey. "The wound's closing nicely," Dr. Grant said, glancing at his scanner. Its data glowing like a piece of abstract art. "Your species heals remarkably fast." "Your Majesty." Queen Azara nodded faintly, but her eyes never left Jake. She had been watching him with quiet intensity for nearly an hour, her expression unreadable. Finally she spoke. "Leave us," she ordered the doctor. Her tone wasn't a request, it was command. Dr. Grant hesitated, looking at Jake for confirmation. Jake gave a short nod. The doctor packed up his tools and slipped out, the door sealing behind him with a soft hiss. Suddenly the room felt smaller. "You know this is going to stir trouble," Jake said, breaking the silence. "Me being alone in here with you. Your guards hate it. My commanders think you've done something to my mind. And the politicians, well, they're losing their minds trying to explain all this." "Let them worry," Queen Azara replied. Her English was smoother now. The Crethians learned fast, faster than any human could. "They don't understand what really happened in that valley," she continued. Jake frowned. "Then tell me. I know what we did, but why did your guards run? Everything I've heard says Crethian warriors would rather die than abandon their queen." A bitter smile crossed her crystalline face. "What you've heard is propaganda, Sergeant. Glorified tales we tell ourselves to sound invincible. The truth is messier." She rose and walked to the small viewport, gazing out at the endless stars. "For 3 years my people have been at war with yours. And in that time we've learned something terrifying about humanity." "Terrifying?" Jake echoed. "You've got stronger weapons, better ships, better tech. What could you possibly fear from us?" Her voice was quiet, but her words cut deep. "Because you don't know when to stop. Every time we think you're broken, you come back harder. Every ship we destroy, you build 2 more. You fight with a desperation that defies reason. We fight for honor. You fight because you refuse to die. That terrifies us." Jake thought of the human colonies that had burned, the millions lost. "We're fighting to survive," he said. "When you've got nowhere left to go, desperation becomes your only weapon." Queen Azara nodded slowly. "My guards saw the hopelessness in that battle. They made the logical Crethian choice to retreat and fight another day. But in doing so, they broke the deepest vow a royal guard can make." Her voice wavered slightly. "They abandoned me because fear had taken root in them, fear of your kind. Humans are unpredictable, reckless. You die for reasons that make no sense to us. Reasons like protecting an enemy queen." Jake gave a small, uneasy smile. "Any decent soldier would have done the same." "No," Azara said firmly, stepping closer. The starlight caught the shifting colors under her translucent skin. "That's where you're wrong. My guard Keelan told me what he saw before he returned. He said you had the chance to run, that you could have saved yourself. But you stayed. Not because of orders. Not out of duty. You stayed because something inside you wouldn't let you leave me to die." She reached out and placed a cool, shimmering hand over his chest just above his heart. The touch sent a faint electric tingle through him. "This," she said softly, "is what my people don't understand about humans. It's what we fear most and what we've forgotten. You fight with more than weapons and machines. You fight with this, with heart. You call it honor, but it's more than that. It's the refusal to surrender what you believe is right, even when every law of logic says you should." Jake didn't know how to respond. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the ship's engines and the faint, rhythmic sound of their breathing. Jake didn't know what to say. He had never thought of himself as brave or honorable. He'd simply done what felt right in that moment. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I think you're giving me too much credit." "And I think," Queen Azara replied gently, "that you give yourself far too little." She lowered her hand but didn't step back. "Jake Morrison, do you understand what you've done? When my own guards fled, you stayed. You protected me with no reason to. You've created a debt that cannot be repaid. In Crethian culture, such a bond is sacred. It ties not only 2 people, but entire nations." Jake frowned slightly. "I don't understand." I know, she said with a faint, sorrowful smile. But you will. When I return to my world, when I stand before the Council of Nobles and tell them what happened, everything will change. The human who stayed when Crithians ran will become a legend. You will become a symbol of what we lost, and what we might still regain. Jake felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. I don't want to be a symbol, he murmured. I just want to go home. I know, Azara said softly, her tone filled with compassion. But heroes rarely get to choose their path. You made your choice in that valley, Sergeant Morrison, and now both our peoples will live with its consequences. She turned away and sat back on the examination table. The queen who had once seemed untouchable now looked fragile, tired, and deeply alone. Tell me about Earth, she said quietly. Tell me about your home. So he did, as the Valiant drifted through the endless dark. A human soldier and an alien queen spoke of life, of home, of hope, and of the fragile dream that maybe, just maybe, their two worlds could find peace. Outside the med bay, Keelan stood guard beside human Marines. His presence there said more than any words could. He had failed his queen once, but he would not fail again. If that meant standing shoulder to shoulder with humans, learning to trust them, even to see them as allies, then so be it. If a human sergeant could find honor in protecting a foreign queen, then perhaps a royal guard could find honor in protecting them both. Inside, Jake spoke softly about Earth. He told her of the oceans that stretched farther than sight, of mountains that reached the clouds, of forests whispering in the wind. He described the crowded cities and the quiet little town where he'd grown up, where everyone knew everyone else. He spoke of his friends, his family, and the simple life he'd left behind when he joined the military. Queen Azara listened intently, her iridescent eyes never leaving him. Occasionally she asked questions, careful, curious questions that showed she was trying not just to understand his world, but the human heart itself. Do humans fear death? She asked at one point. Jake thought for a moment. Yes, most of us do, but there are things we fear more. Like what? Like letting others die when we could have saved them, Jake said. Like living with the knowledge that we were cowards. Like breaking promises we made to ourselves about who we wanted to be. Azara fell silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful. My people once believed the same, she said. Long ago, before we replaced passion with logic. We used to honor courage as much as wisdom, but somewhere along the way we forgot. We became so afraid of dying foolishly that we forgot how to live bravely. It's not too late to remember, Jake said quietly. Perhaps not, Azara agreed. She turned toward the viewport, watching the stars drift by. Maybe that's why fate brought us together. Jake Morrison, so that you could remind my people of what we lost, and so that we could remind yours that life is more than endless struggle. Jake stepped beside her, both of them gazing out into the glittering void. Somewhere out there was her homeworld, and the future waiting for them both. Are you scared? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. I'm about to ask my people to make peace with a species they've been taught to hate. I will stand before the council and tell them a human showed more honor than our own warriors. Outside, the Crithian homeworld, Kirath, hung in the blackness like a jewel carved from starlight. Its vast cities shimmered like living glass, their structures growing from the planet itself, rather than built by hand. Jake stood on the observation deck of the Valiant, staring down at the world that had been humanity's enemy for 3 long years. It was hard to believe he'd soon be walking on its surface. Nervous? Came a familiar voice. He turned to see Captain Hayes standing beside him, hands clasped behind her back. Terrified, Jake admitted with a half-smile. I'm about to attend an alien council as an honored guest. Never thought my life would get this strange. Captain Hayes smiled faintly. You did the right thing at the right time, Sergeant. Sometimes that's all it takes to change the world. She paused, then added quietly. Command wants you to know you don't have to go. We can decline the Queen's invitation. No one would blame you. Yes, they would, Jake said, his voice steady. And more than that, I would blame myself, if there's even the smallest chance this could end the war. I have to take it. Hayes nodded. She understood. For what it's worth, she said, I'm proud to serve with you. What you did in that valley wasn't just brave, it was heroic. Jake gave a faint shake of his head. I just did my job. No, Captain Hayes said firmly, meeting his eyes. You did far more than that. You did something that very few would ever have the courage to do, the officer said softly. You saw someone in danger and chose to help them, despite every reason not to. That's not just duty, Jake. That's true heroism. Before Jake could answer, a voice echoed from the intercom. Sergeant Morrison, report to the shuttle bay. Your transport is ready. Jake took a steady breath, squaring his shoulders. Guess it's time to go be a hero, he muttered under his breath. The shuttle bay was alive with activity. Humans and Crithians gathered together. In the center stood Queen Azara, radiant in robes that shimmered like liquid light, shifting colors with every graceful move. Her guards surrounded her, and among them was Keelan, who gave Jake a respectful nod as he approached. Are you ready? Queen Azara asked. As ready as I'll ever be, Jake replied. He wore his full dress uniform, every metal polished, every ribbon aligned perfectly. Yet deep down, he knew that no medal could ever represent the most important thing he had done. The shuttle ride to the planet's surface was tense and silent. Jake sat beside the Queen, with Keelan and the other guards filling the remaining seats. Through the window, he watched as they descended through clouds that glimmered with color, revealing cities that looked as if they'd been sculpted from giant crystals, beautiful, alien, and surreal. The landing platform stretched wide, as large as several football fields. Thousands of Crithians had gathered to witness their queen's return and to see the human who had saved her life. Jake felt every gaze on him as he walked down the ramp. He forced confidence into his steps, even though his heart was pounding. The council chamber was more intimidating than Jake had imagined. A vast dome of crystal surrounded them, amplifying every sound, reflecting every movement. Hundreds of Crithian nobles filled the seats, their jeweled eyes glinting under the strange light. 7 thrones stood at the chamber's center, home to the 7 elder counselors who ruled beside the Queen. Jake took his place beside Queen Azara as she began to speak. Her voice carried strength and grace echoing through the chamber. Though she spoke in the Crithian tongue, translators allowed Jake and the human observers to follow every word. My people, Queen Azara began, 3 days ago I nearly lost my life. An ambush on Vareth Prime destroyed my convoy and left me moments from death. In that moment, my royal guard, those sworn to protect me, fled in fear. A ripple of shock spread through the assembly. Keelan and the other guards stood motionless, heads bowed in shame. But one warrior did not run, Azara continued. A soldier from a species we have long called our enemy. A human. Sergeant Jake Morrison stood between me and death. He had no oath binding him, no reason to stay, and every reason to run. Yet he remained, he fought. He was ready to die for a queen who was not his own. She turned to Jake, her crystalline features glowing with pride. This human reminded us of something we have forgotten, she said. That true honor isn't about logic or self-preservation. It's about doing what's right even when it costs everything. The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned toward Jake. I stand before you today because of Jake Morrison's courage, the Queen declared. And I tell you now, if this human, this so-called enemy, can find it within himself to protect a life not his own, then we can find it within ourselves to end this war. Not because it is practical, but because it is right. An elderly counselor rose slowly. His crystalline body had grown cloudy with age. What you ask is difficult, Your Majesty, he said. The humans have taken much from us. Many of our people have died, and many humans have died as well, Azara replied firmly. If we continue this path, death is all that awaits us. I propose an immediate end to the fighting. I propose peace talks with the human government. And I propose that Sergeant Morrison serve as our bridge between our peoples. He has proven himself worthy of that trust. Another elder objected. You would place the fate of our empire in the hands of one human soldier? I would place it in the hands of the human who stood when all others ran, Azara said unwavering. In the hands of one who understands the value of life, no matter what form that life takes. The debate raged for hours. Jake stood silently as nobles argued over his worth, his motives, and whether he could be trusted. The endless voices echoed. In the crystal hall until the setting, sun bathed the chamber. In a cascade of rainbow light, finally the oldest elder rose again. We accept Queen Azara's proposal, he announced. Let it be known that the Crithian Empire extends peace to humanity, effective immediately. Let Sergeant Jake Morrison serve as the bridge between our worlds. May we learn from each other as he and our queen have learned. The chamber erupted. Some voices cheered. Others protested, but the decision had been made. Jake felt Queen Azara's hand rest gently on his shoulder. When he turned, he saw tears of light streaming down her crystal face. "You did it," she whispered. "You didn't just save me. You saved us all. You didn't just save my life in that valley," Queen Azara said softly. "You saved all of us." In the months that followed, Jake Morrison became something entirely new, the most unlikely. Diplomat in human history, he traveled countless times between Earth and Kyrath, carrying messages, resolving disputes, and helping two once bitter enemies learn to see one another as people, not monsters. It wasn't easy. The work was long, frustrating, and filled with miscommunication and mistrust. But slowly, inch by inch, things began to change. Treaties were signed. Borders were drawn. Trade routes opened. For the first time in living memory, the guns were silent. Through it all, Jake remained at the center, the human sergeant who had simply done the right thing when it mattered most. The Crithian nobles, once cold and suspicious, began to respect him. They saw his honesty, his fairness, his determination to bring peace, not glory. Even the guards who had fled that day grew to admire him. Keelan, the great warrior who once hung his head in shame, often stood beside Jake during negotiations, a living symbol that honor could be lost and found again. Human leaders, too, came to rely on him. The Crithians listened to Jake in ways they never would to generals or politicians. Somehow, he had earned something far rarer than medals or titles. He had earned trust. Yet the work was heavy. Some days, peace felt like an impossible dream. Old wounds reopened, anger flared, and the weight of it all pressed down on Jake's shoulders. In those moments, he would remember the valley on Vareth Prime, the smoke, the fear, and the decision he made to stay. That memory kept him going. It reminded him that one person's choice to do good could still change the course of worlds. Queen Azara was always there beside him. Over time, their bond grew beyond politics. She became a true friend, someone who understood the loneliness that came with leadership. They spent long nights talking beneath alien skies, sharing stories of their fears, their hopes, and the fragile dream they were trying to protect. One evening, in a garden blooming with crystal flowers, Azara asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it, Jake? Do you ever wish you'd run that day?" Jake thought for a long moment. He thought about the quiet life he'd left behind, about the endless meetings, sleepless nights, and the responsibility that never seemed to end. Then he shook his head. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. What we're building here, this piece, it's bigger than me, bigger than either of us. If what I did in that valley means children on both our worlds can grow up without war, then it was worth it." Azara smiled, her crystal face glowing softly in the garden's light. "You truly are a hero, Jake Morrison, even if you still don't believe it." A year passed since the ambush in the valley. Jake stood once again on the observation deck of the Valiant, gazing down at Kyrath. But this time everything was different. The world below was calm, alive with trade ships, learning centers, and cities where humans and Crithians walked side by side. The war was over. The dying had stopped. Scientists from both species worked together. Students studied on each other's worlds. Families were healing, rebuilding what had been lost. There were still tensions, still moments of distrust, but peace had taken root. And that was what mattered most. As Jake stared out into the starlit horizon, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "Thinking deep thoughts again?" Queen Azara stepped up beside him, her reflection glimmering faintly in the glass. She visited human ships often now, and the crew treated her not as an alien monarch but as a friend. Jake smiled faintly. "Just wondering how I ended up here. A year ago I was just another soldier, no one special. And now I'm somehow a legend to two civilizations. It doesn't feel real." "You were always a hero, Jake Morrison," Azara said gently. "You just needed the right moment to prove it." She looked out at her homeworld, her eyes glowing softly. "My people tell stories about you now. They call you the human who stood. Children learn your name in school, alongside the greatest warriors of our history." Jake rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "That's kind of awkward." "That's history," Azara corrected with a smile. "And history always finds those who shape it, whether they want to be found or not." Then she turned to face him, her expression warm but serious. "Tell me the truth, Jake. Are you happy? You gave up your simple life for all this. Was it worth it?" Jake was quiet for a while. He thought of the soldiers who had written to him, thanking him for giving them the chance to go home. He thought of the children who would grow up under the same stars without ever knowing war. He thought of the fragile peace that had cost so much to build. Yeah, he said finally. It was worth it. Every sleepless night, every argument, every doubt, all of it. Azara's smile deepened, glowing like dawn through glass. I'm glad, she said softly, because I have something important to tell you. The council has made a decision. They want to give you a title, Queen Azara said, her tone both proud and gentle. A formal one. The council has decided to make you an ambassador of peace. The human government has already agreed. Jake blinked in disbelief. An ambassador? I'm not a diplomat, I'm just a soldier. Azara smiled softly. You're far more than that now, Jake. You've become a symbol of what's possible when courage overcomes fear, and compassion replaces hate. The council believes, and I do too, that you should continue this work officially. We need you, Jake, both our worlds do. Before he could answer, the doors slid open and Keelan stepped into the observation deck. The towering Krithian warrior had become Jake's loyal companion over the past year, his shadow and silent guard. Though Jake had long forgiven him for running in that valley, Keelan still carried his guilt like armor, repaying it with devotion. Forgive the interruption, Keelan said in his deep, steady voice, his English now smooth and precise. There is something you both should see. A ceremony is beginning on the surface. A ceremony? Jake asked, turning to Azara. A memorial, she said softly, for everyone who died in the war, human and Krithian alike. A monument has been built in the capital city, a place where both our peoples can remember the fallen. Together, the shuttle descended through the glittering atmosphere of Kyrath, weaving between crystalline towers and glowing spires. Jake had been to the planet many times before, but its beauty still struck him every time, a blend of alien perfection and newfound peace. When they arrived at the memorial park, Jake's breath caught in his throat. In the center of a vast garden of luminous plants stood a monument unlike anything he'd ever seen, an enormous sculpture made of intertwined human metal and Krithian crystal. The two materials curved and folded into one another, forming a single unified structure that gleamed in the fading light. It was fragile yet strong, cold yet alive. It was everything their alliance had become. Two broken halves forming something stronger together. Thousands had gathered for the ceremony. Humans and Krithians stood shoulder to shoulder. Families held hands. Soldiers who once faced each other across battlefields now embraced like old friends. Children played in the grass laughing, their differences meaningless. A human general, Victoria Kane, her gray hair shining in the light, stepped forward to speak. Her voice carried the weight of years of war. We gather today not in anger or vengeance, she said, but in remembrance and in hope. We honor those who fell on both sides. This war taught us something we should never forget, that we are not so different. We all bleed. We all grieve. We all love. When she finished, an elderly Krithian named Torin took the stage, a father who had lost 2 sons to the war. His crystal form flickered faintly as he spoke. For 3 long years we saw each other as monsters, he said. But one human, Sergeant, showed us the truth, that courage and honor can exist in anyone, no matter their form. He reminded us that every life has value, that peace is not weakness, it is strength. Then Queen Azara stepped forward. Her voice echoed through the open plaza, steady yet filled with emotion. I stand here today because one man made a choice, she said. One man decided that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was safe. Jake Morrison could have run. No one would have blamed him. But he stayed, and in doing so he changed everything. She turned toward Jake and extended a hand, motioning for him to join her. Jake hesitated. Crowds were never his thing, but Keelan gave him a small, firm push. Jake smiled faintly and stepped forward. This monument stands for all those we lost, Queen Azara continued. But it also stands for what we have gained, understanding, friendship, peace. And much of that we owe to the humans standing beside us. The crowd erupted in applause, a roaring, unified sound of 2 species celebrating survival. Humans clapped. Krithians lifted their luminous hands in their own gesture of honor. The sound swelled and rolled like thunder. Jake felt tears sting his eyes. He wasn't a man who cried often, not during battle. Not even when he'd lost friends, but these were different tears. Warm ones, hopeful ones. After the ceremony, he walked among the crowd. People stopped him, shaking his hand, thanking him, sharing their stories. A Crithian mother clasped his arm. Her son had been a soldier, but now her younger children would never have to fight. A human father embraced him tightly, voice trembling as he said, "My daughter died in the war. Because of you, no one else's has to." Children gathered around him asking if being brave meant not being afraid. Jake smiled sadly and said, "No."
Being brave means doing what's right even when you're scared.
As the sun sank low, painting the crystalline city in gold and violet light, Jake found himself sitting on a bench beside Queen Azara near the monument. "Do you know what the best part of all this is?" she asked. "What's that?" "That it almost didn't happen," she said quietly. "If you had made a different choice that day in the valley, none of this would exist. The war would still be raging. More would still be dying. But you made the right choice. And everything changed." Jake was silent for a long time, watching the sunset shimmer across the monument's surface. "It's kind of scary, isn't it?" he said finally. "How much can depend on one person's decision?" Azara nodded. "It is. But it's also beautiful. It means anyone, anywhere can make a difference. You don't need to be powerful or special. You just need the courage to do what's right when the moment comes." They sat in peaceful silence, surrounded by families, human and Crithian alike, laughing, crying, remembering, healing. After a while, Azara turned to him again. "What will you do now, Ambassador Morrison? Where will you go next?" Jake smiled faintly. "Wherever I'm needed. If there are other conflicts out there, maybe I can help. Maybe I can show others what we've learned. That peace is possible if people are willing to fight for it, instead of against each other." Azara nodded. "That's a heavy burden to carry." "Yeah," Jake said, standing up. "But I think I can handle it, especially if I've got friends to help me." She rose beside him, her crystal face glowing in the twilight. "Always, Jake Morrison. You saved my life. I will stand beside you for as long as you need me." Keelan approached, his massive form casting a long shadow over the glowing park. "The shuttle is ready," he said simply. Jake took one last look at the monument, at the people, the laughter, the peace that had been bought with so much pain, and nodded. "Let's go," he said. Queen Azara smiled softly. "Ready?" And together they walked toward the shuttle, two friends, two worlds, one shared future.